time to wrap up. This is our last lecture for the semester, for the course. And I'm going to continue today raising ideas. And as I said the last couple of times, raising ideas and for discussion, for consideration. This last lecture is the most kind of, if you want, speculative or philosophical or food for thought. And I want to emphasize, as we had last time, this far from mathematics, but also far from science. So it's more conceptual issues of how do we think about the world around us, the role of physical matters and the roles of ideas, and so on and so forth. Again, I'm going to follow with the theme of a commitment to physicalism or to science in the way I described it in previous lecture throughout the course, actually. And but I want to emphasize again that dualism is an option. It's just a matter of, I would say, personal choice of you know, whether one views it as an option or not, as a reasonable option about perspective on the world. I don't, but that's something that there are serious thinkers even today that adopt some type of dualism, which is fine. And that's open for discussion. But I'm going to continue with the theme of monism and commitment to physicalism. But I want to discuss today beyond physics, and I want to explain what I mean by that. So many physicalists or materialists or naturalists or whatever you want to call them subscribe to the notion, to the metaphysical notion, that there is nothing else beyond science or beyond empirical observations and descriptions of them by natural laws. This is the only thing which we have, and the rest is illusion or whatever you want to call it. I want to raise an alternative option. And the alternative option is that we live in multiple universes. They are overlapping. They are not spatially distinguished from each other. And in particular, only one universe is spatially located. The other one is not, the aspect of space is not the relevant one. Anyway, so we are living within, at the same time, if you want, with multiple universes. One of them is what we discussed, physics, the natural world, but the other ones are extremely important for us as human beings. Nevertheless, they are beyond physics. Okay, so let's see how far we can go with this idea. Okay, so what happened? Okay, okay, good. So here's a list of those multiple universes. There may be more, of course. You can think about more, for instance, art or aesthetics and so on. I didn't put there. But what I put is physics. We discussed it at length. Mathematics, we discussed it a little bit. And that's not the main topic of my presentation today. I'm more interested in things, in universes which are neither physics nor mathematics, what we call sciences, like rationality, religion, morality, and so on and so forth. Okay, so I want to categorize the last three universes, put them under one category, which I call normativity. Normativity is not normal. The normal in normativity is not normal versus abnormal, but normal in the sense of norm, of a law, of an authority. And normativity means all the things that that have a pull on us, have an authority on us, that they are telling us what to do and what not to do. Telling us means that we take them into consideration, or we view them as considerations about to do or not to do. That's what it meant by the notion normativity. It's a norm. It is a law. Exercise a law, law-like interpretation for us.
Haim?
Yes.
Do you mean that these kind of laws do not have a basis in biology?
So that's what I want to suggest, that we talked about closure of physics. We talked a little bit about closure of mathematics. I'll say a few words about that later on, but we talked about that as well. Again, others may object to the idea that mathematics is closed. I'll talk about it a little bit. And now I want to suggest that normativity, whatever it is, this whole space is also closed in some sense. It's in some sense independent of physics. So what do I mean by that? So basically what I mean is the last two sentences, that normative statements, if you want to decide whether this is bad or good, whether this is wrong or right, you don't open a physics book, or you don't open a mathematics book. You open a discussion within the normative world, or if you want, if you ask, is this a good reason to do something? If A is reason to do B, and you enter into internal discussion about that, or discussion with your friend, the discussion will be about normativity, about, yes, this is right, this is wrong, about other things which are right or wrong, which we believe are right or wrong, and so on and so forth. You are not saying, well, but there is, something about the external world which decides this. So it's somewhat like mathematics, that questions about mathematical proofs are not to be decided by physics. So questions about normative issues are also decided within the normative world. That's what I mean by that.
But the point of religion is that you do try to make it as mathematical as possible. Like if it's in Muslim Sharia or Jewish halacha, you have a certain set of axioms written in a book, and you apply laws. Okay, it's not just arithmetic, it's the halachic laws of deriving the law. And then you can say, I believe that's right or wrong, but the halacha is like this.
Sure.
And that's the idea of, in this case, that's definitely an idea of deriving normativity through very much a mathematical process.
Okay, you can, but it's not math. You don't suggest that the math department will study Shulchan Aruch, right? No.
Well, I think the people in math department would be very good poskim.
No. I'm asking.
Much better than the ones in the comparative religion department.
No. I'm asking, do you think that Shulchan Aruch should be studied as part of mathematics?
No, because the laws are different than mathematical laws. It just have totally different laws.
That's all what I said. That precisely. I didn't say that normativity cannot have the same structure as mathematics, but whatever it is, you are not deciding about halakha by solving some theorems in mathematics, and you're not deciding about theorems in mathematics based on halakha. So they're independent, whether they have, all normative systems, whether religious, halakha, or something else, are, are thinking based on logic, and to the extent that they are structured or not, it depends on the matter at hand. So obviously, legal system as normative systems are more structured, not only halakha. There are books of laws to do this, to do that. Other systems which are less formal, moral systems, are less formal. But so the fact that they're structured as axioms and laws, that's essentially makes my point that they have structure, internal structure, but it's not a structure which is decided or dependent on the fields of mathematics and physics. That's what I mean.
Haim, there's a lot of mathematical and scientific consideration in halakha. And the opposite is not true, of course, but in halakha, they have to take into consideration all of this for many different reasons.
Okay, that's a good point. And this is why the notion of closure in normative systems, it's not only in halakha. Think about moral statements, okay? So, if I'll do X, I'll harm Y. But that depends on some physical mechanisms that will make it or won't make it true that if I'll do X, I'll harm Y. So that is the condition that I'm taking into consideration when I make a decision about whether I should do it or not. If I assume that it's not good to harm Y, and I have input from the physical mechanisms that if I do X, I'll harm Y, then of course. So what I mean is there is input. So I agree that those closure statements should not be taken to be a complete disengagement. You can imagine that the natural world exists without us being around. But of course, us being around and have legal systems and halachic systems and normative systems and value systems and goals and all these are not independent of inputs, of conditions and constraints that come from the physical world around us. And also any thought that we have is kind of based on logic and maybe to some extent also on mathematics and so on and so forth. So I agree that the notion of closure here is more circumscribed in the sense that you need inputs from the physical mathematical world when you make a consideration about normative decisions, reasons to do something, and so on and so forth. But ultimately, once you integrate these inputs, you have to make a purely normative decision. So science, like is popular thing saying science is about what is there, and the normative system is about, what to do. Ought, is versus ought. Okay, so ultimately, you need the input from physics and from mathematics, but ultimately you have to make a value decision. And the statement is that this value decision is to be determined within a value system, whether it's halachic, whether it is legal system, or whether it's just moral system that we adopt, and so on and so forth. That's a very simple statement, but people can argue also even this is true. For instance, people might say that all these value decisions are, basically decided by evolution, about that we are really not deciding about that in a meaningful way. But I want to follow this line of thought that I believe is more reasonable. Okay, but let me elaborate more, and you'll see that things are not simple. So again, physics is maybe simple, empirical observations, causal relations, law of nature, this all what we call physics. Mathematics is closed, but it has several facets to it. There is the why, which we already discussed in the past. I just want to repeat it. I don't deny that that if you ask how come we human Homo sapiens engage and were able to develop and to understand mathematics, is something which is not related to nature. The external question, of course, are coming from evolution, social structures, neuroscience, the brain, and all these questions. So if you ask how come the mathematician thought about this solution and so on, that's of course, you have to do with mechanistic answers, which is the physics circle. But if you are to decide from within, to decide about mathematical theorems, then it's kind of internal game. It's within the mathematical world. Okay. Now I want to break it down and to say the following. So when we think within mathematics, it's not even pure and clean in this case. For instance, suppose we have two mathematical theories, so two mathematical frameworks. We have to decide which one is favorable. Okay, how would you decide? First of all, it has consistency. Okay, things which are not consistent, we tend to throw away. This is purely intrinsic to the system, whether things are contradicting each other or not. So that's obviously a very important constraint. There are other things like richness and scope. So two mathematical frameworks or models. One is restricted to the natural numbers. Another one is the real and complex and so on. It has a much richer scope, wider scope, and more richer mathematical objects and properties and so on. We tend to favor the richer and the wider in scope theorem. So this kind of intrinsic consideration, but there are others which I don't know, beauty. We tend to prefer theorems, or not theorems, but mathematical models or approaches or frameworks, also on aesthetic considerations. Now, this is already not purely within, I don't know, but aesthetics, whatever it is. I would also dare to say that we prefer, or much of the appeal of mathematics, and I would say even when we have to decide about system 1 versus system 2 mathematics, we also take into consideration not only the scope within mathematics, but also its applicability to the real world, to deriving natural laws or to applying engineering. It's not criminal you don't have to be purist completely in a silly way. So you see that the closure of mathematics, yes, there is a core which is closed, but if you ask how we value mathematical systems and compare with them, then we are allowing, and I think it's fine, we allow ourselves to add also features which are not purely mathematical.
Haim, what about scientific ethics, like ethical experimentation and so on?
That's another. I agree. Also, I didn't bother to put it, but you're right that in physics itself, the reason why I don't want to elaborate on that is because the physics I put there as the physical world. I'm confounding two aspects of physics. One is the theoretical, the laws that we formulate, the science that we do, and there you have issues of ethics, of course, and so on. The other one is, the physical world out there. So I'm confusing the two just because I don't have time to elaborate on them. But you're right, that if you think about physics or science as an engagement of human beings and human society, then of course, normative aspects enter into it. Absolutely right. But if you think about science as something which describes what is there out in the world, then, as I said, without us, it will still be the sun will do what it does, the earth will do what it does, and so on. So it's kind of independent. But you're right, that the, physics as a science as an activity, as intellectual activity of human society is, of course, very closely and intertwined also with normative issues. All right, so, but let's move about normativity. So when I say closure of normativity, again, I want to say the left side, this external side, I don't mean that there is no evolution or there is no neuroscience and there is no social aspect and so on and so forth. All this, of course, play a role in kind of third person explanation. Okay, if I make a moral decision and you are looking at functional MRI, you say, your amygdala is doing that, or your prefrontal cortex is doing that. I'm not denying that. I'm just saying that in addition to this external mechanistic physics explanation, there is also the right-hand side, the why, which is the internal considerations, how do we decide about normative systems, and so on and so forth. and in that sense, it's closed. So even here, it's not simple. For instance, first of all, I think, like in mathematics, consistency or coherence is a very important criteria. Okay, and I'm going to devote a large part of the lecture today about that. Because whatever is our commitment, like to religion or to culture or to other systems, well, it's very rational and very, I think, intuitive to all of us that we should strive to make it consistent, that it should not be self-contradictory in any way, okay? But then there are other aspects, of course, universality or scope. We have also, this is also one of the important criteria. If we have a moral law doing something, or this is wrong to do, this is right to do, it's not appealing or less appealing if it's only applied to me, but not as a law. As normative systems, from their own nature, it is a law. So it is not something that I do for myself. Now, I don't want to take it to an extreme. Kantian view of normativity, of course, is that the universality is the only criterion that is really essentially, valid. Any maxim which is universal, it's okay, accepted. If not universal, then forget about it, and so on and so forth. Now, you can talk about religion, particularly Judaism is universal in the sense that it's not private to each one of us to decide. There are system and law, but nevertheless, it only applies to Jews and not to non-Jews. So it's less universal in that sense, maybe relative to other religions. But scope universality is definitely something which has a pull on us. Identity is another way of thinking about not universality in terms of numbers, but scope. I think, and also it's related to coherence. I think systems which determine us as normative person, determine our identity, I think are superior to systems that are fractured, that, if you're outside, you do this, if you're inside, you do that, and so on. Some scientists say, I'm scientist in the lab, and I am, I don't know, Catholic or religious or Jew in the church or in the synagogue. Okay, it's less appealing in my view. You need a holistic identity. Okay, and finally, ecological. So again, it's like I said, it's not pure. You cannot say that ecological is what I said before, is the interaction. After all, normativity is not usually, normativity is not about our being, our life as isolated bubble. We are part of a community. We are part of the of life on Earth. We are part of, and so on. So there is ecological aspect. So I would say normative systems that somehow are disengaged from the world, from the physical world, are less favorable in my view, because after all, normative systems is about our life in this world. Now, again, I'm entering here a minefield, because some religious thoughts would say, well, that all the laws of religion is about the world to come, not this world. But I don't. Okay, if somebody thinks like that, that's fine. I tend to think that all that our focus is about life in this planet, in this universe, and with our society, and so on and so forth. Okay, anyway, good. So I want to focus on the issue of coherence, because I think it is true for physical laws, it's true for mathematics, it's true for normative systems as well, that a necessary condition, at least, is that these systems, each one of them, should be internally consistent or coherent. And the question is how far we go with that principle, with that constraint. And I want to introduce to you in this context the notion very popular in philosophy of last century and this century, reflective equilibrium, as a technical, as an attempt to make more precise the notion of coherence, in particular in normative systems. Okay, that's what I want to, whether you accept it or not, whether you accept what I said or not, but it's part of our, I think it's interesting culture of Western thought and philosophy, this concept of reflective equilibrium. I found it stimulating and thought-provoking, so I want to share it with you. Okay, before reflective equilibrium, the roots of that concept actually comes earlier on in the context of, I would say, science, not normative systems, science, okay? And it has to do with David Hume's famous problem of induction. Then David Hume, I think we already mentioned him as a skeptical about causal relations. He said, well, you never know, A follows B, or B follows A, B follows A. It doesn't mean that A causes B, and so on and so forth. Another way to, another aspect of David Hume's kind of empirical approach is the problem of induction. So what does it mean, induction? Here's an example. All observed instances of bread have been nourishing. The next instance of bread will also be nourishing. That's natural, the way we view things, okay? So we are making those type of inductions all the time. We in the language, when we talk, when we write, when we read, when we think, we always make those predictions, whether we think about it or not. And of course, in science, when we write down laws based on observations, we make essentially these predictions. So David Hume says the following: the transition from 1 to 2, I mean, who said that because bread was nourishing in the past, it should also be in the future? Well, you say, okay, because principle of uniformity of nature, because we know nature is uniform, is regular, is repeatable. If there is no perturbation, all the things that we talked about until now, causality, law-like behavior, universality, inverse, whatever, all this, nature tends to be regular in space and time, unless there are some reasons not to. But then David Hume says how to justify this principle. In other words, okay, it's true. In the past, we saw nature was uniform, and we made predictions, and predictions turned out to be correct in the past. Okay, so it seems that this principle has a good reason that we should adopt it. But then David Hume observes and he says, well, but again, we are now making projections from the past to the future. We're saying because the predictions based on the principle of uniformity of nature were successful in the past, and therefore we adopt it as a principle for the future. But this is basically the same question. It's a question begging. Okay, so how do we know that it will work in the future? So we are in a vicious cycle, or a vicious circle, right? So we cannot get out of it. So basically, David Hume was skeptical about the whole project of making predictions based on uniformity, on regularity. In other words, since we observe things in the past, it should also give us good reason to predict about the future. Very classical, well-known problem, the problem of induction. Now, I don't want to, we can discuss whether this is how to respond to it, but one famous response was given by a very influential philosopher past century, Nelson Goodman, in several books. One of them is The New Riddle of Induction. And he basically says the following. Okay, what is the problem? The basic task is justifying an inductive inference is to show that it corresponds to the general rules of induction. But how is the validity of the rules themselves to be determined? That's basically the problem, that Hume's problem. This looks flagrantly circular. Inferences are justified by their conformity to valid general rules, and general rules are justified by their conformity to valid inferences. But this circle is a virtual one. So basically what Nelson Goodman suggests is that there is no point, it's pointless to try to justify our inductive practices from outside. There is no outside. It's all from within. It's all a consistency issue. We are making predictions or inductive, particular inductive inferences, like the bread example that Hume brought. From that, we are generalizing it to rules of induction or causal relations or laws of nature and so on and so forth. Then what is the basis of those rules? Well, because they are explaining our practice of induction. Okay. Now, what is justifying our practice of induction? The rules. So you see that the rules and their application to particular cases are engaged in a circle. We justify our inferences in particular cases by our commitment to the general principles of induction, of uniformity, of regularity, of laws of nature, and so on. And Nelson says we justify, the only justification of those principles is because they work. What does that mean that they work? They justify, they explain our practice of induction. So basically he says, forget about it. There is no hope and there is no reason to look for stronger or external sense of justification. So the last part, the process of justification is the delicate one of making mutual adjustments between rules and accepted inferences. In the agreement achieved lies the only justification needed for either. In other words, we make corrections. Sometimes we make predictions which turn out to violate the rules. Okay, so we correct the rules. And sometimes we go the other way around. So we'll make these adjustments between the way we apply the rules to concrete cases and the way we generalize concrete cases to have the rules. And those are everything within the system.
Hi.
Yes,
Can can I ask something?
yes.
Okay, so I agree to some extent with this argument. The thing is that I think this is valid if you're staying only in one level of detailing degrees of freedom of your the system you're trying to describe. Because once you consider that there is a basis for your rules in a more detailed model, so then it can make predictions for the coarser levels, I would say. Not sure I was clear enough, but do you understand what is it?
Well, any prediction is based on, again, based on the fundamental assumption that things are regular in time. There is some regularity in time, with whatever the details the model is. It's not about whether the model is precise enough or not. It's about the fact that we make predictions is based on unproven hypothesis that what was in the past will be in the future, right? That's a very simple. So you basically, we have to accept, according to Nelson, we have to accept the fact that we are part of that system. We are making those assumptions, and at every point in time, they are not supported by evidence because there is no evidence about the future. So we are, as I said, but we cannot psychologically, if you want, not make those predictions. So we make those predictions as part of our cognitive system, and we generalize them to rules to, you know, to help us, if you want, in making those predictions. And we are making corrections on both sides. I don't see why the details of the model here will matter as a matter of principle. Yeah.
No, I'll have to think about it further because I need to crystallize it better.
Okay, think about it. So I do not want to defend necessarily this virtuous circle aspect in the case of induction, because many think, I don't know, that the problem of induction, yes, it is, but it's not so interesting in the sense that there is no cognition, human or animal cognition, which is not based on the assumption of uniformity. And some of you may know, may heard about Kantian view of that problem, which basically said it's kind of a priori origin about the general's law of nature, that rather than the way Jung thought about it, we first have observation, then we make all kinds of predictions, and then from predictions we make we generalize them to laws of nature. Kant says there's the other way around. Of course, laws of nature are based on predictions and based on observations, but the very fact that nature is law-like, that the world around us is uniform, is so basic to our cognitive system that we don't have to worry about this problem. And I think, I don't know, scientists definitely will subscribe to that. There's no way to make sense of any thought or any statement, meaningful statement, without making this assumption. So anyway, it's a big thing in philosophy of science in general. But what I want to take from it is not the induction problem, which I think is not so interesting because of what I said. But I think what Nelson did, and so Nelson Goodman did, is introduce the notion that not every cycle is vicious. Some cycles may not be vicious, may be very rich, may be productive just by focusing on internal consistency without looking for external or for justification. So the next chapter in this line of thought is John Rawls, philosopher of ethics and political philosophy and moral philosophy, very influential philosopher, American philosopher of, again, the last century, John Rawls, particularly about justice, but in general about moral systems. And he introduced this reflective equilibrium, which is basically formalizing Goodman's virtuous cycle, formalizing it and extended it to other systems, to normative systems in general, if you want, or at least to moral systems and so on. And basically, the idea is the following. We are, again, thinking about, we are making all that, we have moral intuitions, if you want, moral statements about what we believe is right or wrong in this particular case, like killing the baby was wrong, an example. But then we think, okay, why was it wrong in a particular case? Okay, we say, well, because there is a principle. It is wrong to kill innocent people, or thou shalt not kill, or whatever it is. So we are seeking for principles to organize or to account or to explain our moral intuitions in concrete places. But then when we reflect on those general principles, we often come up with the problems. For instance, what happens if you are in situations where killing one innocent person will save an entire city of innocent people? Well, then, I don't know, we can discuss it, but you might want to say, no, it is wrong to kill innocent people unless it is necessary to save large number of innocent people and there is no other alternative available. So now we amend the rule because we are attempting to make a generalization. We then say, what are the consequences of generalization? We don't like the consequences. Because what happens if this and this happen? Then we say, okay, let's revise the rule. So this is kind of the circle between our moral principles and moral intuition, between principles and concrete cases. And this circle is what is called reflective equilibrium. It goes around, and the more we reflect about our moral practices, and the more we reflect about general principles that we arrive at, and the relation between them, the more we make adjustments and corrections until we reach equilibrium. It's reflective in the sense that we have to reflect. It's moral intuition is something that maybe less reflective, is coming from our, I don't know, cultural or educational or natural habits and so on. But then when we reflect on them, we are attempting to put the whole system of moral commitments that we might have into consistency, and then we reach an equilibrium where you don't need further adjustment. Of course, the equilibrium is an ideal, is asymptote you want, but that's kind of the more equilibrium, the more closer to equilibrium the system, the moral systems or the normative systems that we adopt, the better, the more stable it is. Okay, so that's the concept of reflective equilibrium. And here there is a more specific details of that, okay? So how do, if I want to apply, this is not a descriptive, this is, you know, a methodology. If I want to really make sure that I'm not contradicting myself. Okay, so on one hand side, I have I'm committed to some halachic law. On the other hand side, I have some moral statement that I also committed to, but maybe they're contradicting each other, or or I have not moral or halachic, but some goals that I want to achieve that contradict and so on. So there is balagan. If we want each one of us to build ourselves individually, or maybe also society, but let's talk about individually as kind of coherent identity, normative identity, then we should strive to put everything into a coherent system. And the way reflective equilibrium goes about it is saying, look, we first come up with an input. What is the input? Our initial judgments. They're called considered judgments. Considered judgments means that the input, the initial input, is not simply caprice, it's not simply emotional. Oh, I don't like it, I do like it. But things that we thought about and we adopt and endorse as concrete statements. So they have initial credibility. We don't have reasons not to hold to them initially. So this kind of initial condition, okay? Then we try to make sense of them. Why we are committed, endorse A, B, C? Well, there are some general principles. We think about it, we come up with principles. Thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not cheat, thou should help your friend, and so on and so forth. But even more than that, we want to put everything into a theoretical framework, not only a list of 10 commandments. For instance, if it is religious, we say, well, it is some law, some eternal law coming from some authority. Others may say, well, there are moral principle, kind of overarching principle, which is all the things that you should not want that it will happen to something else, to somebody else, should not happen to you, and vice versa. Kind of an overarching principle. Or for instance, utilitarian or consequentialist, you say, well, things which have bad consequences in whatever it is, for instance, will hurt my future or my children or my family and so on. Whatever the principle, but is a theoretical overarching principle. And that principle can come up, is interacting with the world. And that's what I said, it's kind of background theory, theoretical framework, which depends on what we think are human beings and how they evolved and what will be good for human society and what will be good for the climate and ecology of the earth and so on. So all these are inputs which go into our attempt, which should be our attempt to have, I say, a coherent identity or a global as possible, coherent normative system. We never achieve it, but that's the goal, I believe. And in doing that, we are correcting all the time, or we should correct all the time, we should revise our practices if they are in conflict with what we believe now is correct. It's like Goodman's correcting back and forth. So also here, correcting back and forth. And reflective equilibrium, as opposed to other views of normativity, allows and calls for correcting on all levels. And I think that's important because other notion of normative systems would say, well, there are normative truths which are foundations. We're not allowed to touch, whatever they are. And then there are consequences and exceptions maybe and applications and so on. But reflective equilibrium is completely intrinsic. We came up with some initially credible judgments, but we should be open-minded. We should say, well, but it seems to contradict a principle which I like very much. So I don't know, maybe I have to negotiate, and negotiations go all the way up and down in all degrees of freedom, as Hadar said. Okay, no component of the normative system is immune to revision in this reflective equilibrium perspective. because it's completely intrinsic. It doesn't assume that there is something from outside the system, from evolution, or for something that says right or wrong. It is internal to the system. All right, I must say I've been thinking about it more, and I try to make a mathematical model of that to make it, does it make sense or not? But by the way, reflective equilibrium is one of the games in town in ethics and moral philosophy, kind of in the sense of application. It's not theoretical. People think about, for instance, the principles of justice and equity and so on, and trying to apply this algorithm, if you want, to come up with a theory of justice and other values, social values, political values, and so on.
But right. That's highly subjective. The whole thing. I can make my reflective equilibrium. You can make your reflective equilibrium, and then we'll run the algorithm because the statistical algorithm. It runs on my hardware of my brain with my social background, and then and so I don't think that's any worth it. It just like at least Kant I understand. Kant at least wanted to have universal truths for everybody, but this is just a nice algorithm, statistical algorithm, which will diffuse in any kind of direction for every person. Okay. So
wait, first of all, the fact that you have a consistent answer for yourself is not trivial at all. That for yourself you can say if something is moral or not is non-trivial.
Well, it's for sure. I can say everything. Consistency is not hard to achieve. For example, I define with one sentence a totally morally consistent thing.
I'll come to it. Let me just finish an exercise. So I try to. Okay, so here's the problem. Okay, so here's basically the problems. Convergence, even individually, there is no guarantee of convergence. Maybe if I even individually apply to myself, I will just go back and forth correcting the rules to accommodate my commitments to concrete cases and vice versa, and I'll just do oscillations. But the big problem is the uniqueness problem, which is even if it converges, but it will converge likely or possibly to different equilibria dependent on the initial conditions. And the initial conditions are those considered judgments that we start with. Now, it could also be non-unique because the way we apply this algorithm, our brain, cognitive will be different and so on. But even if we apply, even algorithmically, we have a rule how to correct and so on. But at least, at the very least, it starts with some initial conditions. So the problem of initial condition is a very big problem. And moreover, it's not only the fact that Daniel and me may come up to different equilibria, but the problem is that somebody else may come to an equilibrium which is not only different for me, but completely unreasonable. But what can we do? This was the initial condition. So I agree, these are serious problems.
Why is it a problem? If you have some kind of local minimas and you have some different societies that live according to different moral rules and so on, maybe it's fine.
So, well, then what? Who cares about this whole system then, if it doesn't contribute to anything? Well, it doesn't solve any of the questions.
Well, I disagree, because it is, even if it is everyone will have his own or her own equilibrium, still the idea that we should, a recipe how to try to reach equilibrium among our own possibly conflicting system of commitments, I think it's important. Again, the question is about sufficiency, whether this internal consistency is sufficient. But I'm saying the idea by itself, it's maybe likely not to be sufficient, not satisfactory, but the idea by itself that there is a way that, in principle, to think about how shall we view our own commitment to different normative systems? How shall we reflect about it? How shall we engage in self-criticism about it, and to strive to coherent system for ourselves? I find it extremely appealing, and I agree that the question whether it is sufficient is another issue. But I must say, I'm moving around the world in my community and reading a little bit about the world around us, and I find it's lacking. People grab from here and grab from there, and events that happen throughout the world. I don't want to get into fake news and politics and so on, but you see enormous lack of any attempt, not for truth, who knows what truth is, but attempt to be coherent about it.
I think also coherence in these terms, in terms of moral, like what you may think is coherent, or many times I think that for other people think their thoughts are coherent, but for me, it doesn't seem coherent. The level of coherence that you require is subjective in a sense, or in terms of the level you're looking at, or
could be. I don't know. So anyway, I'll come to it. But I think the issue specifically about Rawls' suggestion and other philosophers about reflective equilibrium as a methodology, the problem of what is correct, not correct, what is reasonable initial conditions of considered judgments. And the problem is that once you have a way to decide what initial conditions are better than others, then you already apply some rules about normativity. So that I agree. This is a problem. This is an open problem. So the reason why it's appealing to me is, on one hand side, I see serious problems in its claim that it is sufficient. But on the other hand, it's very appealing to me as a very necessary condition. Anyway, so now I try to do to actually ask myself about the uniqueness issue. Okay, whether there is a problem of uniqueness, and I'm not sure that there is a problem of uniqueness. I'll tell you why. So let's think about neural networks. Okay, so how would you take this this recipe here and turn it into an algorithm, maybe a neural network? And I'm not sure how to do it. I'm just giving you some ideas, and I'd like to hear what you think about it. So here's my interpretation. Okay, so we have a neural system. And obviously, and it's a plastic system. It's learning, and because we are interested in generating from inputs, generating rules. So imagine you have a neural system. You have neurons, and you have synapses and weights and so on. You have input-output relation, and the initial conditions are those considered judgment. There are some inputs, concrete cases, scenarios. And there are some outputs, which are, in this case, I think this I should do. In that case, this I should do. On Shabbat, I should do this. On Sunday, I should do that, whatever. These are my input to the system. And then I try to generalize from this data to come up with general principles, with commandments, with normative principles, okay? So I do learning, supervised learning, if you want. I start to run learning algorithm. And then I come up with a network that use these considered judgments. And now I have a network with synaptic weights. Like I can, this is a rule, right? I'm coming with a new scenario, I'll get the answer. This is, you should do this, you should not do that. You can also think about a more global theoretical framework. For instance, the architecture of the network, meta-learning, cross-modal, top-down. You can also see that it's not simply learning in the narrow sense, but you can have also a broader theoretical framework which combines different normative systems into one system. Now, what is reflective equilibrium? Okay, you try to minimize inconsistency. So that's fine. Here's why I'm stuck, which unlike neural networks, you have data in neural networks. You have data, the data is fixed. You are not touching it, right? And you try to generalize it to discover principles. But here, the data is not external facts about the world. We discussed it. The data is our initial convictions, which we should be open to revision. So now it's problematic, right? We are now going to use the learning rule on the basis of the data to discover the rules, like in any learning algorithm. But now, if we're not happy, if the error the best error that we get is still big, we're now going to correct the data. This is not allowed, right, in neural network. So here's the point. If the data is fixed, then learning algorithms will tend to approach a fixed point. And that fixed point is the equilibrium. And that equilibrium would depend on the data. That's fine. This is the non-uniqueness. But now suppose that learning is allowed to correct the data. Well, that's a dangerous loop. But now I don't know if it's unique or not. Now I correct the data itself. So what kind of a dynamical system it is? Now it's completely recurrent network with no input, right? Because I start from some initial condition which has data, but now I'm changing the initial condition in a way. So I leave it open. I believe, just a moment, I think there are two possibilities, there are three. One is that the initial condition will still play a role, there will be non-uniqueness. Another one, that the system will approach a unique fixed point, but non-interesting one. Or that it will reach a unique fixed point, which is interesting one. So what I want to say is that, so I think Shaket said it, it's not trivial to get equilibrium, even on individual level. And I want to say even more than that. It may be that there aren't many equilibria because the process of demanding revision on data. So if you look at neural networks in learning, there is such a thing like discovering outliers or discovering errors or filtering noise. So in other words, you use the network itself to correct the data on which you use for learning. Not to say adversarial examples and so on and so forth. So, but imagine that you are modifying, you take the data to learn the weights of the network, but now if you're not happy with the results, you try to modify the data itself. And then how far you go? So I speculate that there is a whole universe of initial conditions that will go to one fixed point. Not all initial conditions will go to one fixed point.
I just think you implemented something totally different. You implemented in a neural network just Kant, which because you fixed you defined very well the judgment mode and have as less errors, as less contradictions as possible. That's Kant's idea. And then you have a deterministic rule. You have the general principles are defined and fixed. You have, let's say the error rate function is defined and fixed. And how a neural network has a threshold function, it's defined and fixed. Now you just implemented Kant in a statistical manner, and that has nothing to do with the rational equilibrium. You just implemented Kant in a neural network. I don't think. No.
Kant. I don't know why it's
no, but
I'm implementing reflective equilibrium, not Kant.
No, because first of all, the neural net, first of all, the error function is defined, right? It's fixed, the error function.
You're allowed also to change it if you want. Who said it's fixed? Did I say it's fixed? Did I say that the nonlinearity is fixed? Come on, I didn't say.
Okay, but you have to define somewhere, you have to make definitions, right?
You start, the point is you start with the initial commitment to an error function, to nonlinearity, to a network architecture, but gradually modify them until you reach an equilibrium. Equilibrium here means not a minimal error, but means zero error or close to zero error, means that you have a consistent system.
Okay, but means the error function is defined.
Well,
the error function is fixed.
Well, consistency is the error function. Right?
Exactly, consistency is the error function. It's as less as contradiction as possible.
If you are not accepting consistency as a measure, then there is no.
No. I love this. That's exactly Kant's definition. That's exactly what Kant says. Everything which doesn't make logical sense, I'm throwing out. Right? That's Kant.
Not logic. No, come on. It's not logic.
Which is not consistent. Okay, everything which is like the liar's paradox in Kant.
I don't know. I don't know. I don't know what Kant. I don't know Kant.
Okay, but the idea is the function. The error function is fixed, and that's as less as errors as possible. And that's inconsistencies as possible, right?
If you are not accepting the notion of consistency as a requirement.
No. I do accept it. I want to just make sure that I understand you. The error function is fixed. And
consistency, you allow consistency.
Okay, very good. Okay, let's move on. Okay, fine.
Consistency, okay, good.
Okay, next thing is, the learning rule, yes, or let's say the technical, let's say, non-linearity in neural networks. Is it somehow different?
I can change it, you're wrong, I didn't say
anything. Fine. So there's a rule which changes, right?
Sure.
There's any kind of rule, a fixed rule. Yes, which defines the non-linearity that it may change in one direction, but it's fixed, the rule, right? However you define the neuron operates, maybe how the neuron operates may change, but there's a rule, fixed rule, right? It defines it.
Meta learning allows to change everything.
Fine, but not meta learning also a fixed rule, right? Somebody has to implement the meta learning somehow on a third derivative level, on a fourth derivative level. But there is some kind of implementation, right?
Okay, good. I agree.
Okay, fine.
Okay, but
even if you take the fifth derivative, the fifth derivative is hard coded.
But our brain has also limitations. No?
Okay, fine. But now you hard coded the principle. Yes, how the thing was said. So basically, you're a religious fanatic now. You define some halacha, yes, with the 5 meta learning rules, and
what I'm saying,
once you implemented this thing and you defined fixed the meta rules or in the first, third, fourth order derivative, I don't care how high the meta is.
The meta rules may come from universal constraints of human cognition.
Okay, so
universal.
That's your religion. Okay, that's your religion.
That's my
meta rule. The one who hard codes the meta rule, he is the religious fanatic. He is the religious fanatic of this.
Okay, good. Anyway, I hear you. You hear me, and everybody else hears. Okay. I'm just throwing it in. Whatever your religious allegiance, I am challenging you students to kind of think about this reflective equilibrium idea in dynamical terms. And I find it interesting, whatever the consequences of your life, interesting question how to model it. And particularly, it is, as I said, it's kind of dynamics where the data dynamics is based on is itself is being revised. And anyway, think about it. I don't want to spend more time about it, but I think it's a good project for any of you that are interested in the project. Okay, more comments?
I have a small question about, in general, about normative systems. For me, I'm not sure if it's true, but it feels like there is a strong part of interaction between, in this case, humans. So the moral system is a result of complex interaction of humans over generations, and not of one person sitting and reflecting over the possibilities of things it can do. So, and I feel it's lacking here.
I agree. So that's another important issue which I didn't elaborate, but I think has to be added to the issue of convergence and initial condition and so on. And I completely agree with you. It's not purely individual. Any meaningful normal system has to do with interaction with membership in a society, or with identity as part of a family, a part of a tribe, part of a nation, part of whatever. And therefore, it's again, the aspect of uniqueness is not so simple. Because of that interaction, it means that the initial condition is kind of a collective one. Is not, we are not an isolated entities. And the thinking about this convergence to equilibrium is not really each one of us individually is doing that. There is some degrees of freedom with each one of us chooses, but I would say even more than that. Once I adopt an identity, normative identity, I'm committed to a society, to a community, and further
if you adopted an identity and then you are put in some completely different society, it might fail, or I don't know, it won't work.
Yeah, but I think this is true in a real sense. What I'm saying is that coherent identity is the goal, but also when we come up with considered judgment, or halfway through it, we may change identity in a real sense. You know, somebody can adopt a religion, somebody
because
can
it's a continuous process.
Can say, I don't like the US culture, and therefore I go to that, and so on and so forth. So these are big decisions which are changing in some sense our aspect of our normative identity. And with all of it, there is a big part of a normative system that we exchange, that we swap. But
yes. So you might allow some kind of external input in some in the system, that the external input is a result of your interaction with society or with the world, or so on.
The normative system, individually or as a part of a social network, is all the time has input from the external world. Physical world, your health, your experience, it's all, these are considerations that enter into your normative judgments, as I said it at the beginning. Okay, and definitely, but it's like in a neural networks when you think about animals. Okay, it's an active system. You are not simply, what I'm saying, we're not simply interacting and getting input, and we are sometimes dynamically changing our environment, which has a very important effect on our normative system. Okay.
And sorry, I have a question.
Yeah.
I'm just interested, what prevents the system of getting a trivial solution? Let's say...
No, I didn't. That's what I said. I myself said it may be trivial solution, then it's not interesting.
Yeah, no, like I will say, if I have a binary function, moral or not moral, like bad and good, how about I just assign everything to good? I mean, I can, like, everything is moral, whatever, like every input. And that's a consistent solution. You have zero error because everything you put in, you always have, everything is moral. The trivial solution of every, like, you put zeros in, zeros out.
That's, as I said, I don't think, I think the story is missing something, but I think there is a necessary aspect to it, which I think is more interesting, because it's something which we can engage with and think about it. We are... אין דבר יותר שלם מלב שבור. I don't, לב שבור, yes, but identity שבורה, No. So, yeah. Yeah. Was one more comment or question?
I think that I just wanted to add that I think that the idea that a person is in a society is part of the reflection. I mean, you don't reflect within yourself, you reflect through people asking you things and challenging you. And that could answer also what Gili asked, what is the coherence? The coherence is defined by the society around you. If you'll be asked more questions, meaning you're not coherent, and they're asking for reasons. Well, why do you think so and so? So you have to supply answers, and then you go into
Yeah, I completely agree. So that's they call it an algorithm. It's not an algorithm, but that kind of algorithm should be viewed in a community. Should be viewed within the context of society.
Although sometimes a whole society can relax coherence and accept things that are not coherent. For example, I don't know, you can be a good Christian, but you can be, and you don't want to kill anybody, but you are in the, I forgot the word, like the
military.
What?
Clan.
In the good example, in the KKK. I was going for the Spanish Inquisition. You're a good Jew. Sorry, you're a good Christian, and you don't want to hurt anybody, but you're in the KKK. And this is the whole society. So are they not exercising this, or are they relaxing what coherence is?
It's a good question, I think.
But who said it's not coherent? Maybe it's maybe they have some system and
yeah,
it's coherent.
No, I mean, I'm sure somewhere in the New Testament it says not to kill, you know.
Well, yeah.
No, but they added the moral principle that black people are just beneath whites and therefore do not deserve the same moral consideration, and that, solved their problem neatly.
Look, the question of relativism or not about normal systems is a big question, and I'm not giving an answer. I'm not offering an answer. I don't have an answer. But that question is, is an important question that we as a society and as individuals always are faced with. People, we look at some cultures or some society or some communities, I don't know, organized crime, whatever, they have their own consistent rules of how to behave and whom to kill and not to kill and so on. They seem to be consistent, but we don't endorse them, so that's fine. But the question, whether there are objective criteria for which one can say, this is good or this is bad, or just only consistency, I'm saying consistency to me is a necessary condition, and I think it's not enough. As you said, system may generate their own distorted sense of coherence, and that's it. Okay. I don't want. There are other. I think there are other dimensions which are not discussing. Okay. About normative systems, but I just want to emphasize the issue of coherence and consistency as an interesting dimension. All right. Okay, so I think time is late, so let me. Okay. I want to end the course actually by going back to the issue of normativity and the deterministic world. And I think I owe an answer to Shaket's comment in last lecture. And I think I just want to say a few words about it. That all these questions about normativity and consistency and so on is all kind of within a first person question. But let's go back to the notion of deterministic world and ask whether this has some aspects which affects our thinking about those notions. And I want just to make a few observations that you may disagree with me, which is fine. But I'm convinced by that. And this is that when we started to talk about free will, we talked about responsibility and so on. And I think the issue of responsibility is still problematic. So, and the reason is that any sense of praise or blame or agency about the past is irrational. So to say that somebody deserves punishment because he killed somebody, an innocent person, is wrong if deserves mean that it's really, there is objectively something that he deserves in the literal sense. What we should say is that punishing that person for this deed will deter in the future, directly or indirectly, and suppress this behavior in the future. But in the past, we are all part of nature, and all our decisions and deliberations are part of nature. So there is a dichotomy, in my view, between how we look at the past and how we should look at the future. When we look at the past, we have to acknowledge with natural piety that we are part of a mechanism, and whatever glorious deliberations and reflective equilibria and whatever went in our mind, it is part of nature. So praise and desert and agency, all these notions are notions which are like education, like legal systems, like halacha, whatever. All these normative systems are supposed to guide us as individual, as society, in our looking for the future. But we should not take them as a tag or label on what we or others did in the past. Because this is like taking a tsunami and say tsunami is morally wrong, or an earthquake and say an earthquake is morally wrong because it killed the entire village or volcano and so on. We are not different from that mechanistic. So when we talk about reasons to do something, when you talk about deliberation or decision making, these are all to the extent that the future is not known. The past is gone, the future is not known, and it's rational to deliberate and to make decisions about the future and to use all our normative capabilities to guide us in how to behave in the future. But the past is purely mechanistic. Okay. I want to end up with a statement, a quote from Rabbi Tzadok HaKohen MiLublin, a very interesting Hasidic rabbi, intellectual from the 19th century, which had, unlike most of mainstream Judaism, which is subscribed to the classical notion of freedom, free will, and free choice, and our responsibilities stemming from that, he was very deterministic. Don't worry, he wasn't physicist or biologist or chemist. His determinism was completely, if you want, theological, coming from religious beliefs. Nevertheless, he was deterministic. And he grappled with the notion of tshuva, repentance. What is the whole business of trying to correct or rectify, or if everything is determined? Okay, so he said in Hebrew, tshuva, it's not about changing yourself, it's about giving back your agency to God. שמשיב אותו דבר על השם יתברך. רוצה לומר שמכיר שהכל פה על השם יתברך וכוחו, אפילו המחשבה טרם נוצרה בליבו של אדם. And in other passages, which I don't have time to bring here, he make the dichotomy between העולם הזה and העולם הבא, in the sense that the present world is the past. When we look at the past, it's all mechanistic. in his view, is all determined, predetermined. The future is open. And the future is where our work, I mean moral, normative, work as human being is geared to. But our view of the past doesn't belong to us. Our actions that we did don't belong to us. So that's in English, kind of, I try to kind of paraphrase this idea. And I find it refreshing that even within religious thoughts, it's not only in Judaism, but in other religions as well, there is room for acknowledging the limitations of us as human beings, and the limitation of us as determined in our modern perspective by our psychology, by our physical, mechanistic constraints that are as part of nature. And I find this, as I said, is the reflective equilibrium. My personal reflective equilibrium is to acknowledge the big divide between looking at things in the past, including our individual and others, and viewing it correctly within a purely mechanistic perspective. And at the same time, when we have to act rationally and with reason in the future, it is up to us to make a decision between right and wrong. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the course. I really enjoyed the course and discussing everything. Thank you.
So Haim, if as science advances and we could predict what people will do in the near future and maybe even a little further, so that will that adds that future to the past.
I agree that the better predictions we can make about the future, including the future of our own actions, the less we'll have a sense of agency. So if I connect it to the entire course, we talked about determinism on one hand side and predictability on the other hand side. And I think predictability is the more important factor in our self-conception than as agent, as active agent in the world, than deterministic. Which means that as neuroscience or science progresses, let's say 50 years from now, 100 years from now, we will be able to, in real time, to make predictions about what our actions will be. In those domains that we will make good predictions, we will be withdrawing our agency, or at least as active. We will be conscious inspectors of unfolding of events which are predicted, but less of actors. So we are actors to the extent that the future is open. However, if you remember quantum mechanics and chaos and statistical physics and the complexity of the world and the fact that the brain is part of this complex world, I think we all know that this predictability will be limited in principle by non-physical limits.
So chaos saves agency, basically.
But it's not only chaos. It's chaos is part of it. But you know, even our interaction with the enormous number of degrees of freedom of the world around us, it's you know, it is impossible quantum mechanics involved, all these aspects which are making the world messy and unpredictable will remain to a large degree. But indeed, on those domains that we are predictable. So for instance, let's take an example, which is not really a good example, but nevertheless, it's an analogy. Imagine that the genetic mapping would advance to the extent that it might be able to predict which profession you will choose. It's unlikely because we know nurture is it has a lot of input to it, but then you are not going to deliberate much about it if you are told, listen, you're going to be a scientist, or you are going to be an artist, or you are then okay. But of course, genetic disposition is only part of the story. But more interesting would be day-to-day. Suppose fMRI is going to tell you that you are going to vote in one way versus the other. So, okay, so you're not going to deliberate much about it. So it's science fiction now, but it drives home the message that the openness of the future, not in terms of forks, but in terms of our predictability of the future, is what makes us agents in the world, and have developed over the ages these normative systems that guide us in this unknown and unpredictable future. All right, okay. Thanks to all. I enjoyed it. It's all, particularly the last lectures. I emphasize it's all, points for discussion and for thinking, or maybe not, for rejection. It's also good. But I enjoyed it, and I hope you enjoyed it too.
Haim, if I may say, I just wanted to thank you also on my behalf. I missed most of the talk today, but I will watch it, and I watched the other one, and it's just it's been a wonderful class. I learned so much, so I'm very thankful for the opportunity to learn more and expand my horizons. And I can imagine I'm talking for many of the people here who it was just fascinating and intriguing. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay, thank you all.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Okay, I'm a bit confused. At the beginning of the lecture, you talked about that you said that you believe in multiple universes.
Yeah.
And then you gave an example of the physical system and then the normative system. But the way you presented, you defined the normative systems, it seems like it seems like an explanation of how we learn stuff. And learning is something that you can explain neurobiologically. So I don't really understand, like, in a way, when you talk about universes, what do you mean? Is it supposed to be independent, I guess?
So I want to go back to one of, just a moment.
I don't know if I'm explaining myself well enough, but
no, I want to go back to one of the slides, which yeah, here it is. Look at the left side of that slide. Okay, the normative system, somewhat like mathematics, has, and it's related to also to my last comments, is if you try to explain where it came from and what is the origin of our capacity of doing it, and so on. And you know what, also, maybe animals also have to some degree a normative system. They are social, they are planning for the future, they have goals, at least high animals. So it's not strictly human faculty, although of course it's different in scope. So all these are part of the biological and physical explanations of how come we are creatures that are normative. But it's the same as saying, how come we are creatures or species that develop mathematics? It's all will be about the brain and about evolution.
No, but mathematics, I'm okay with it because like we mentioned in another class, the idea if whether mathematics was discovered or created. So I guess mathematics, you can talk about it as independent universe. It doesn't have to be like, it doesn't have to relate to the physical world, but normative system does. I mean, they're not independent. So how come they encapsulated in?
But because you mentioned the brain, and I said that the brain is about a mechanism for normativity. This is why I'm referring to this slide. But now the closure of normativity is in the sense of the internal decisions about normative questions, or about moral questions, or prudence, and so on. These are questions that are not decided by physics. Now, as I said, and I want to emphasize, the inputs to these questions is coming from the physical world around us, because we want to do good to our fellow, or want not to harm, or want to keep as a moral principles, to keep the ecology of Earth, life in Earth, and diversity, and so on. All these are statements about how our actions or inactions affect the world. So we need the facts, and the facts are given to us by the perceptual system and by the physical world. But given this input, we need to then make a decision how to label them good or bad. This is the normative aspect to it.
But this a brain is built like that. We just like, it's all the idea of learning. It doesn't.
But that's.
I don't see how it's different
from mechanistic answer. It's like I'm a mathematician and I have to solve an equation. You tell me, well, the brain has learning mechanism that helps you in solving the problem. That doesn't help me, right? Agree? Yeah. It's the same thing. The learning is part of the mechanism. I brought learning also as part of an algorithm, as a model of how to. But again, maybe I confuse you. When I said learning in terms of reflective equilibrium, I just meant it as a dynamical model to explain what is this algorithm, reflective equilibrium. But when we are making a decision about right or wrong, of course, we are making the decision based on our education, based on our learning, based on our interaction with society and all this. But then we have to make the decision, and we cannot say, okay, our synapses will tell us. That's not an answer, right? Like in mathematics, it's not an answer. Of course, learning without learning, you will not know how to do math, right? But it doesn't help you when you solve a math problem and say, okay, let me ask my synapses. That's not an answer, right? So ultimately, normative questions will boil down to decisions or to value systems that you have to apply, to tag, to label. So I don't see.
You presented it as different universes, which means that they're, I guess, independent. But then you said that the normative system needs
independent. I said independent, and I qualified it, and I want to qualify. Independent in the normative case, there is an input to the normative system which is coming from the physical world. You cannot say it in the other direction, or in a very weak sense, right? Physical world exists there without us, we believe, and so on. We will not have physicists, we will not have scientists, but the natural world is there.
The thing is, normative systems don't exist without the physical world. That's a problem.
Well, yes.
That's what I'm talking about.
I think to a large, I would agree with that statement. Normative system, in my view, is related very intimately to what happened to us if we do this, or what happens to others if we do that. Most of it, I don't know, there may be some systems of thought that have an absolute view of right and wrong, which is independent of what happens in the world. But okay, I don't know. I don't think so. I think right or wrong is whatever it will happen. You know, you cheat somebody, so somebody is cheated by you. But if somebody doesn't exist or doesn't believe you, then you don't cheat. And so I don't know. You may there may be a way, maybe religious thoughts or maybe non-religious thought that tag actions independent of the physical world, but I don't think it makes sense, because an action by its own nature is acting on somebody, on something else, on a fellow, on the society, on the physical world. I don't see a notion of action, and if there is no notion of action without interacting with the physical world, then I don't. What is right or wrong?
So when you said multiple universes, what did you mean?
I meant that the decisions that we are acting in the world, and we have to make decisions about how to act in the world, how to affect our environment, how to affect what happens to us in the future. We have to make those decisions, okay? What are the factors, what are the considerations that enter into making those decisions? How you make those decisions? Okay, so we are committed. We are committed to our selfish goodness. Then we're committed to the family. But then a lot of normative principles and practices work against our goodness, right? I mean, we do a lot of things. We are sacrificing our goodness, okay, because we believe that, you know, there is some other values which are more important. So all these are normative considerations. The causes and the effects of our actions are facts in the world. But whether we should, therefore, what to do with this information, it's a normative question, and physics will not give us answers to that, I believe, and biology will not give us an answer to that. Some would say, no, forget it. Evolution decides for you, but I hold that it's not so. We have a rich normative system which guide us, which we build, which we endorse, which guide us through this. So I'm trying, in that sense, it's independent. That physics is going to tell us what are the consequences of action 1 or action 2 to ourselves, to our environment, and so on and so forth. But physics is not going to tell us, and therefore do it or not do it. This is the normative question. In this sense, it's closed, because the answer, whether it's good or bad, it's not the consequence. The consequence is the input, but what is the tag, the label, good or bad? That is intrinsic. It is within our commitment to normative systems, or to our identity as normative animals, if you want.
But if you say that you could, that you don't punish people because they did something bad, as a view of determinism, so it does combine something that's out of the normative.
That's constraint. It does constrain. It does constrain so the understanding, our understanding of the physical world and the constraint that it imposes on us does constrain our normative reasoning. Absolutely so. I agree. So again, it's closed in a weak sense, but nevertheless, I believe that there is a core. There is a core a core aspect in our decision which is we cannot just open a textbook in quantum mechanics and say, well, this is bad. This is not right.
I don't know, isn't it
Or
like
this is good.
consistent with the idea of multiple realizability that we talked about?
No.
For me, it sounds like that. It's just another layer.
No, I don't think so. I don't think so. Multiple realizability, I don't think so. I think it's a different notion. Multiple realizability is, no, I think it's a different notion. Well, you know, I could have added another universe. I mean, in that sense, you're right. I could have added a mental, and I would say, you know, this line of thought that think that the mental is detached from the physical, the way we discussed it, would be another circle here. In that sense, you're right. Those that say multiple realizability, because of that, the mental is functional or computational or something, then I would add here a circle on the mental. In that sense, you're right that I think my personal view of the mental is that the mental is very closely related mechanistically to the physical. This is why I didn't add this. But normative system is not simply, it is, you know, on one hand side, it's like qualia, you know, subjective. But from the reasons what we said, I don't agree with that, because it is, you know, normative systems are sometimes public. You know, there is religion, there is legal systems, there is culture. We interact with our fellows and we exchange ideas about, it's part of our agency. So I think it has a different flavor than the subjective qualia questions. I can make, you know, I can be non-committal about qualia and consciousness and so on, and you know, I can carry on with my life, but I cannot be non-committal about normative systems, because every morning and night I'm asking myself, okay, why am I doing this? Why I work so hard? Why I don't work so hard? Why I do this? Why I do that? It's always why? The why question is a normative question. And we are all bombarded by this normative question, whether we think about it or not. We are normative. We always have goals, even if it is selfish. But why should I worry about what will happen to me 10 years from now? Why? Do have fun now. Why should I worry about my family and so on? It's all normative question, okay? Why should not?
Isn't it evolutionary question?
It doesn't help.
It doesn't help. It's not practice. It's not practical to say.
My point is, it doesn't help. Of course, a large. This is the dichotomy of our cognition. On one hand side, we say, well, why should I worry about my well-being in the future? And then you say, no, evolution. Look at the birds and animals that
they also worry about their future.
Put raisins in the winter that will have. They also worry about the future, of course. The point is, Nimrod, evolution is not the full answer, because we have to endorse it. Let's suppose somebody is killing somebody else and then say, well, okay, evolution. Okay, we know that cruelty and aggression is also part of evolution, but we don't endorse it. We try to avoid those instincts or to suppress them, right?
Yeah, because I think that we do it also as part of evolution. That killing is something that has some effect on evolution, and it seems like it's better to avoid it.
I don't, again, Elisheva and Nimrod, and I want to say, I think this is, I don't give a definite answer, because I think this is something which requires much more thinking about it. And this is we are looking at ourselves and others and about animals from two lenses at the same time. From one lens, it's kind of mechanistic. Okay, evolution and the brain and many, mechanistic explanation. At the same time, we are looking at those things from the lens of a normative lens. This is good or bad. I don't care about evolution, but why do you do it? You think about it and make a different decision. It's up to you. We are always playing this double game when we are walking around and acting in the world. And I try to focus on the normative aspect of it. And this is why I said past and future. The way I divide the two worlds is by looking at the past and looking at the future. I don't have, and I'm saying something very personal, I don't have any regret on anything that I did or didn't do in the past. Not because I am an angel, just because this is part of nature. I did it because brain activity and that's it. But whenever I make a decision about the future, I'm of course very careful and thoughtful. I'm not most of the time. I try to justify what I do and what I decide and so on and so forth. So the dichotomy that I see is between viewing things in the past, which is purely mechanistic, and viewing things in the future, which you cannot rely on mechanisms. You don't know what the future is. You're rational. You're a normative person. You have to make decisions. And those decisions are the ones which I call them closed because they are internal to the system. You have to negotiate with yourself. Are you Jew? You're not Jew? Are you are part of the Western culture or not? Are you part of a humanistic culture or value system or all these negotiations and the reflective equilibrium and so on that I think as individuals, we do it implicitly, and I try to kind of give a more explicit formal aspect to this kind of internal negotiations.
But once the moment has passed, you already look at your moral self as a mechanistic, as this moral debate, as a internal debate, as a mechanistic process.
Absolutely. The internal debate is always about what to do next. Yeah, absolutely.
I'm still confused about last week when I didn't really understand how we solved the inconsistency with the micro closure. There are these mental deliberations about the future, and I can't look at the micro physical rules and explain them. And I'm not sure how at the end we solved this. There's the mental rules and how they go about with each other and the physical rules.
You mean the mental versus the physical? No, what I'm saying is the following, and again, I may be wrong. There are mechanistic explanations to whatever goes in the world. Okay, and that mechanistic explanation is about the physical world, okay? About atoms, about photons, about energy, momentum, okay? And our thought process is part of it, okay? Mechanistic explanations are mechanistic explanations inside out, okay? But like mathematics, it's not enough understanding that, internalizing and understanding that aspect of us is not sufficient to guide us in our decision making. It's like a mathematician. It doesn't help the mathematician to know that whatever goes in his world is mechanistically explained when he is faced with a mathematical problem. He has to decide according to the rules of mathematics. So today's lecture, I was focused on that aspect of us, human beings, as decision-making, and I ruled out metaphysical indeterminism, whatever. It's all part of a natural process, but this is not helping us. It's not sufficient. It's helping us, but it's not sufficient in giving us guidance how to make the decision, what input to make into our decision making. It's like the notion of fatalism. Okay, because it's mechanistic, because it's deterministic even, then I don't have to work because the work will be done. No, the work will not be done. You have to work because deterministically you have to work and the work will be done, whatever it is. It's the same about our decision making. At the point that we have to make a decision and the future is unknown, we have to be rational and reasonable and moral and normative about our decisions. So it's confusing, and Elisheva said confusing, and I agree with her. And I agree with you, Gili, if it's still confusing or not satisfactory, but I think this is maybe the tragic, even existential statement about us. We are too smart. We know mechanism, we know so much about the physical world, but still, when we have to make a decision, is the good old world of right or wrong, or beneficial or not beneficial, or it's worthwhile for me or not worthwhile for me? Shall I invest in the future or just worry about now what happens? All these are normative questions which we have to make those decisions. And we're making those decisions more haphazard. Okay, because we did it in the past. But we can also be more systematic about it, more coherent about it, more holistic, more. That's what I said. That's what I try to talk about today. But again, there is a tension between the two, because we cannot fall back into evolution when we have to make a decision. People say evolution, evolution, evolution. It explains everything. Of course, evolution explains everything, but you don't go to the grocery store with evolution, as they say. You have to make the decision. Even if you are immoral, even if you are hedonistic, you have to make those decisions. Okay? Because we are normative, and also animals, to some degree, are normative, are goal-oriented. Okay? So the input into this goal-oriented behavior and decision-making is the normative aspect of us. And it's all about the future. It's all about what considerations should enter into our decision-making process. But there is no decision-making for the past. It's gone, it's given. We are normative for the future, because in the future, we always act, we always make a decision, we make a judgment, we have input to it. And this is the input, the normative input, which I discussed. It's the same, think about mathematics, the same story. Mathematician, you won't help the mathematician if you tell him evolution or synapses or learning, or even functional MRI that is watching her brain. The mathematicians will have to come up with the mathematical answers to a mathematical problem. And we have to come up with normative answers to normative problems. Anyway, that's the way I see the world, and I see us in the world. Okay, food for thought.